Redditors who have completely flip-flopped social or political ideologies. What happened? I used to be against gay marriage, gay rights. Would discuss the topic in high school with friends and say all the things my evangelical church told me to say. The Bible says it's a sin. Their parts don't even fit together. It's a phase. They just need Jesus. Etc. Then I came out. I found that it's more fun to take no side and argue with everyone. I grew up thinking that all drug addicts are lazy wasters. I've known a lot of drug addicts since then. Both recovering and still struggling. It sucked when I realized that they are all just people who were trying to be happy but went about it the wrong way and got stuck there. I cringe when I think about some of the things I said to family members and friends who were struggling. I had no empathy for their situation at all until I watched it happen to a close friend without realizing what was going on. At the beginning of the Iraq War, I was one of these people who today would be a big fan of Trump. I wanted our troops to go in there and obliterate the entire country, publicly execute Saddam, and show the world how powerful the US was. Then the WMDs were never found. We started seeing bodies coming home in boxes. Veterans not being cared for at home. And atrocities being committed. All while our government exploited patriotism for the sake of justifying the wars it was fighting. I just felt cheated by it. And the world is worse off today. I don't really identify with either side of the political spectrum today. There are too many extremes. And awful people who are on both sides. I just don't blindly accept everything the government tells us anymore. Used to be liberal. And then realized conservative and liberal ideology are full of shit. So now I'm centrist. Taking the best of each. Went from being an embarrassingly hardcore MRA, more along the lines of Red Pillar, in high school to being a feminist. I thought in high school that all feminists were man-hating complainers. Then I got in an argument with someone on Reddit and researched heavily into feminism so I could destroy their arguments. Actually listening to what feminist thinkers had to say. Plus reading and evaluating the literature changed my mind. When I read through things like the red pill ideology again, I saw it for the sexist disgustingness it is. It's good to keep an open mind. Needless to say, I don't argue with people on the internet anymore. I used to be really anti-gun. Always felt that most guns, especially assault weapons, are entirely unnecessary and responsible for thousands of needless deaths each year in the USA. I supported every gun control measure I heard about in the news. When the Newtown shooting happened, it upset me so much that I started researching gun control policy and learned, to my surprise, that there's really not a whole lot of empirical data to support the efficacy of many gun control policies advocated by the left-leaning politicians I vote for. The data seem to indicate that traditional gun control policies miss the mark and probably aren't the best way to solve the larger problem of gun violence. Fast forward a year. I went to a range and shot an M9 for the first time. Totally not anti-gun anymore. I used to be all for the death penalty. Until I realized how many people are wrongfully proven guilty. Used to be a liberal and grew up. Lean toward the other side until I realized they were full of shit and didn't care about anyone or anything but their own power. Now I sit in the center. Conservative on fiscal issues. Liberal on most social issues. I am one of the rare people, and the only one I know personally, who went from pretty hardcore conservative libertarian to very liberal as I got older. I started realizing that almost every intelligent person I read, liked, and respected was liberal. And I had to make more and more excuses about why prominent conservatives lied, even more than the average politician's media figures. Why so many were anti-science, racist, misogynist, greedy, and unsympathetic. Finally, I realized I just disagreed with almost everything they stood for. It may sound trite, but several of John Scalzi's articles, while they didn't change my mind, they allowed me to turn loose of some of the libertarian ideals I had embraced and be comfortable calling myself a liberal. I'm a straight, white, middle class, married, college-educated male with a good job who is nearly 50 years old. I actually feel weird that so many of my friends and peers are so conservative and so horrified by my change. I try to be my own devil's advocate and say, what if they're right and I'm wrong? But that doesn't work. Either the facts are on my side or, if there isn't a clear consensus, I usually think I may be wrong. But I'd rather be wrong than be on the same side as them. I used to think that GE technology was evil because I saw Food Incorporated. I realized that it was a heavily biased and edited movie that didn't examine issues from an objective point of view in the slightest. And as such have become really interested in science and science-based activism. I used to vote strictly along the party line with Republicans until one thing happened. Religion. I can't stand it mixed with politics. Personal beliefs are supposed to be just that. Personal. I've long said I don't care if the president of the US sacrifices a chicken and nails it to the wall in the Oval Office. I don't need to hear about it and they just need to do their job. Once you get past the religious pandering, a lot of other things about the modern GOP start looking extremely flimsy. Many like to call themselves fiscally conservative but socially liberal. The great advancements our country has made in the past don't allow for that. Cutting corners and pinching pennies on the NASA budget didn't get us to the moon. Nor did it put the masses to work during the mass infrastructure builds of the Roosevelt and Truman eras. If we're going to truly build America back up and become a dominant competitor in the global market, everyone has to be all in. Corporations and citizens alike. Throw away because it's personal. Abortion. I was vocally pro-choice. In high school my mom and I went with a close friend to talk her mom into letting her go to the clinic. I wore buttons. I donated money. Etc. I had my first abortion at 19 and my second at 26. Over the years, part of me always wondered about what might have been. Especially when I met people with children about the same age as mine would have been. I felt guilty sometimes. I would pray about it in tears. I hated seeing anyone with harsh anti-abortion bumper stickers or t-shirts because I felt like they were personally calling me a murderer. I'm still pro-choice. I don't regret these decisions. I was an active drug addict living in survival mode the first time. And in a relationship with an active alcoholic the second time. I'm still pro-choice at the end of the day. But in my own heart I have doubts that weren't there before it happened to me. And I have as much trouble these days with the people who coldly argue that it's just a clump of cells as I do with those who argue that it's unquestionably murder. Both sides lack compassion for the perspective of the other. And too often no one is really thinking of what the woman or girl living with an unwanted pregnancy is going through. I grew up conservative with a hard work provides mentality. Left my small town and started to see that hard work wasn't all you needed. Luck, economic starting position, access, and help were all vital to quality of life. Began to see where politics were framed to support economic classes at the expense of others and groups based on ideology, race, class, sex, religion, etc. were paired against each other for reasons almost never related to the issue at hand. Shifted far more towards liberal on social issues while remaining conservative on fiscal issues. I went to college. Seeing people who were totally 110% into the liberal beliefs I was into kinda turned me off from it. And I befriended people from the conservative camp who were able to express their concerns in a way I could relate to. Now I sit somewhere in the middle. Still leaning left but pessimistic about damn near everything. Went from being an NRA life member to actively supporting gun control. I grew up in a fairly conservative household that always had guns around. It was inconceivable to me that you could have a safe society without guns. The switch happened when I left the US and lived abroad the first time and realized that the American perspective on guns feels normal to us because we live it, but most other developed countries think we are insane. And not hyperbolic joke insane. They think we are deranged and deluded for allowing people to easily own guns. That started my political and ideological shift. Realizing that my perspective was shaped by the people around me and there was a different valid perspective on the same issue. Along the way I had a family member murdered with a gun purchased legally even though the person had a criminal record, and I've had friends who had gun accidents because of negligence. Over the last 10 years my position on guns has gone from that of an apocalypse survivalist to someone who would support a repeal of the Second Amendment entirely. I was raised to be very pro-life. People who killed their babies were lazy whores who are going to burn in hell. Then I had to do a paper on a controversial topic and I chose to do it on abortion. But to argue pro-choice because it was an easy paper and I wanted to make it harder. I started doing research and learned that a lot of situations weren't black and white and there was more to it than ladies slutting it up and then killing their kids. Later, in my 20s, I realized that it didn't matter what my opinion on the matter was. I wasn't going to force other people to do what I wanted. I still wouldn't get an abortion myself. But I wasn't going to tell anyone else what to do. At 29, I got pregnant and realized that no matter the situation, I would never force anyone to do this if they weren't prepared. I also decided that men really need to stop talking about it like they know what's going on. At this point, I was also educated on diseases and effects of babies. I realized that in some situations where the baby won't live, it is much less cruel to end it in the womb than to force them to be born. TLDR, I went from every abortion ever is evil to some abortions are the best choice. I grew up in a home that was so anti-gun, squirt guns were not allowed. I went to college and studied criminology. I now own real guns. Learning more about something often changes your opinion when you are used to hearing emotional, political rhetoric. I started off conservative. As I grew older, the message of the party started sounding hateful. I'm not a hateful person. I've worked hard. I don't like paying taxes, but sometimes you gotta kick out a few extra bucks. You get what you pay for in the world. If you pay a cheap price, you get a cheap product. I was raised by a Republican mother who made it a point to portray Democrats as lazy moochers and welfare queens. The longer I spent outside of her home, the more I realized that as a woman and a member of the lower middle class, Republicans do not have my best interests at heart. She was so upset when I switched parties that she refuses to have any more political discussions. I'm a libertarian that leans Republican. I realize that the difference between most people's politics is not what the problems are, but the solutions to those problems. Example. I was always told that Democrats care about poor people and Republicans care about rich people. However, they are both trying to solve many of the same problems. In simplistic terms, most Democrats see themselves as making sure everyone gets an equal piece of the pie. Most Republicans see it differently. They would say that we're not dealing with a pie of fixed proportions. Everyone can participate and grow the pie. Capital, resources, and labor invested can boost economic success. Much like the deregulation and greatly reduced government spending spurred the post-war economic boom of the 1950s. I have become more conservative on certain issues, but still would deem myself closer to the liberal side of the spectrum. Although I try to be in the middle as much as possible and look at both sides. The issue of welfare fraud and illegal immigrants attaining welfare is something I was originally liberal about. Thought drug testing was wrong and illegal immigrants should have access to assistance, but after working for a year at a DHHS in my state and growing up a lot, I am now completely reversed and think it recipients should be here legally and should be drug tested. Edit. If people are down voting because they disagree, please reply. Would love to have a discussion. If you are because you don't think I fit into this question. Yeah, I kinda get that. I used to think that socialized medicine was a bad thing. I didn't have any good reasons. I just parroted everything that my parents and the conservative news groups would say. Then I met my wife, a type 1 diabetic, and did the math to figure out how much it would cost to buy her medicine and supplies. $500 per month. That shit is crazy. T1D can't be reversed. It's not her fault. It's not caused by being fat. It just costs $500 per month for her to live. Simple as that. She got sick once because her medicine got too warm one day. which can deactivate it, and it was $25,000 for a 3-day hospital visit. That's more than my gross income at the time. Thankfully I'm in the military and I have free healthcare. I just wish every other diabetic had the care we do. Figuring out how we were going to pay for that if I were to separate used to be one of the biggest stresses in my life. I used to hate when I saw a woman breastfeeding in public. I guess I just realized that the only reason it bothered me is because I thought it was a key and just generally don't like babies anyway. And where there's breastfeeding there's usually babies. Now I think it's fine. Obviously I still find it kinda gross and I don't want to watch. But really, screw me and everyone else. They're just feeding a baby. After I left for college I realized just how much of my ideology was based on my parents. I threw everything out the window and started from scratch. I used to be a really bad feminist not too long ago. I, a pastor white woman, thought all white people were racist. All men were sexist. etc. etc. Until my boyfriend kinda knocked some sense into me and I am now free of that paranoia-ridden life. The Waco David Koresh incident. I'm still very liberal but the Branch Davidians got a raw deal. A warrant was being served on a trumped-up weapons charge. The ATF used an informant that repeatedly tried to sell them illegal full-auto weapons on several occasions without interest. Finally after persistence they bought one, several, then you saw the incident where they had a shootout with warrant being served. Yes, pulling a gun on a well-identified law enforcement officer is really bad. But that's not a big enough offense to warrant being burned alive. And the decision to go full assault on the compound was based on false charges that the children were being abused. Knowing that that issue is a hot button issue for then Attorney General Janet Reno. So she agreed to rush the compo 7th. The FB knew the kids were not being abused. They snuck listening devices in with the milk and fresh food that was negotiated for so the kids would have proper nutrition. Yet someone lied to the AG anyways. TLDR. Yes, the Branch Davidians did was wrong by shooting the ATF agents. But they were not an apocalypse cult. Not building an armed camp. Yes, they had guns and loved to shoot but that was as Texas normal behavior. Only after badgering by the G9VT did they buy illegal weapons. Any competent lawyer would have had those charges thrown out via entrapment. I used to believe in consolidated power. Not in a fascist authoritarian sense. But the idea was to let the smaller group run things from the top and that in return, the populace would benefit from good leadership. It became very apparent that throughout the years, the leaders kept the machine oiled for like-minded people to stay advantageous and remain in power. The general population receives whatever crumbs were left and it was explained that this was the best outcome for them. I believe now that a strong population creates better leadership. Take whatever you believe a strong population as you will. To me, it's a healthy, equal society with measures in place to protect those who become vulnerable to get the help they need. Helping someone up from rock bottom stands a much better chance of success than hovering over them and telling them they need to pick themselves up. TLDR. Used to lean a bit on the right. Now I'm a leftist anti-authoritarian scumbag. In high school maybe I leaned libertarian on the basis of not wanting to control others' lives. But I learned empathy of others and have come to embrace a large government that looks after its people. I'd call myself a very left-leaning progressive but that sounds lame as does really anything that lands on the typical left v. right political spectrum. I'm a humanist and I'm not one to categorize policy so easily. I went to school to become a pastor. And 90% of it was lessons on how to be an effective liar and persuade people with flawed logic. They gave us a class on how to build and defend a straw man argument. That isn't hyperbole either. Like you walked into the classroom and on the whiteboard it said how to build and defend a straw man argument. Double quote. You come to a point where you find that each side has valid points about various issues. For example, I think that the government should provide assistance to those who need it. But I also believe that those who seek out assistance need to be held accountable that they aren't misappropriating what's being given to them. After my parents divorced, My mother accepted welfare benefits, but stopped filing for them when she was able to get a steady job. I also believe that immigration needs to be reformed. But I also believe it's absurd to send people back from whence they came to have them re-enter for the sake of the law. Instead of hurting an entire ethnicity south of the border, they should be made to pay a fine for citizenship, and only if they fail to pay then you can talk about deportation. I drank the Dare Kool-Aid and to this day have never smoked marijuana or had any illegal drugs in my system. Alcohol is a different story lol. I thought legalizing marijuana would do more harm than good. But after realizing the effects the war on drugs has had on our country, you think to yourself, look at what happened in the Prohibition era to people who just wanted a drink. I don't smoke, but I couldn't give a single FCK today if someone wanted to light up. I stopped taking my parents' opinions as absolute fact and started reading and researching and making up my own mind. My parents are pretty conservative. I'm definitely the most left-winged in my entire family. Extended family included. I used to think that social programs would make the world a worse place by robbing people of their motivation to become successful. Now that I'm an adult, I realize that we don't do nearly enough to help our fellow man overcome the massive wealth disparity in this country, and that having resources is the first step toward getting more resources. We should provide that first step to our countrymen who were not lucky enough to be born into it. My parents raised me generally conservative, and they seemed logical enough, as decently smart people can be. I found when I grew up though that they either got bum information on some things or just right they understood better than they actually did. I think also they simplified things a bit. They weren't hardcore conservative, but with what I've come to disagree on and the new things I'm aware of too, I'm vastly different than they are. They both are a teeny bit more liberal at their age though. Grew up conservative in the age of Reagan. Parents used to listen to Rush Limbaugh and then Sean Hannity, and watch Fox News religiously when it started. Then as I got out into the world I began to understand more about the world outside of my sheltered little enclave. Now I am center left. I don't think paying higher taxes is necessarily bad. I don't think that welfare recipients are lazy. And I don't think that bigger government is always evil. I grew up in a staunchly Republican household and was a Republican until my late 20s. I parroted all that right-wing crap about welfare queens and liberals being socialists and how we needed to spend more on defense and project a strong military presence around the world. Then I started to actually pay attention to the issues and realized that, for the most part, my values and beliefs are better represented by the Democratic Party. I went from just repeating the things that I had always heard my family say when I was growing up to actually thinking for myself and deciding what important to me. Since then, I have always encouraged my kids to make up their own minds, and we have frequent political discussions where we attempt to look at issues from every angle. My parents are still staunch Republicans, even though, as retirees living on a fixed income, they are doing themselves no favors by voting Republican. And they still parrot those same dumb right-wing catchphrases without even caring if they are true anymore. I don't know if this counts, but I grew up in a pretty conservative religious household, and by the time I was 13 I realized basically everything my mother believed was shit. It was really hard to accept that the person I'd based all my views on forever was wrong about so much.